That's a bunch of bullshit. It really is. I don't like that. I don't like that part of it.
I'm spoiled. When I don't want to do something, I stop doing it. Just like when I do want to do something, I'll do it until I'm finished.
Neil Young has always been known for speaking his mind without filters, much like the way he plays his guitar. He's raw, honest, and uncompromising in a music industry that often values politeness and safe opinions over truth. Throughout his career, Young has built a reputation on honesty, even when that honesty made him unpopular or hurt his commercial success. His strong opinions extend to other musicians' work as well, particularly albums that he felt betrayed what rock music should truly represent. Young's criticisms aren't rooted in jealousy or competition. Instead, they come from a deep belief about what music should be versus what it often becomes in the hands of commercial interests. He has always fought against overproduction, fakeness, and music created by committee rather than from the heart. Many of the albums he disliked were massive commercial successes and received critical praise, but to Young, they completely miss the essence of what rock music should be about. One of the albums that frustrated Young was Fleetwood Mac's Tusk, released in 1979. The band spent over a year and more than $1 million creating this ambitious double album. While it was experimental and received attention for its scope, Young felt it was fundamentally empty. He believed the album sounded like musicians trying too hard to appear interesting rather than just being authentic and real. The production was extremely slick, with carefully layered sounds, but Young thought music lost its soul when it became too calculated and overthought. Tusk represented everything opposite to Young's values. While he recorded in barns and garages with minimal takes, trying to capture raw spontaneity, Fleetwood Mac recorded in luxury studios with endless overdubs. Young could immediately hear the difference. He felt the album was like watching wealthy people pretend to struggle, which struck him as fundamentally dishonest. What really bothered him was the waste involved. Spending $1 million on an album while he was cutting records in just 3 days seemed to exemplify everything wrong with rock music in the late 70s. There was too much money, too much time spent in studios, and not enough genuine soul. Young always believed the best albums happened quickly when inspiration was still hot and fresh. To him, Tusk felt cold and overthought. The Eagles' Hotel California, released in 1976, was another album that Young found deeply problematic. Despite becoming one of the biggest albums ever made and selling millions of copies while receiving critical acclaim, Young thought it represented everything fake about California rock music. He called it music for people who didn't really love music. The polished harmonies, perfect production, and songs that seemed constructed in a laboratory were the opposite of what Young valued. He wanted to hear dirt, mistakes, and humanity in music. The title track particularly annoyed him. While the guitar solo was technically brilliant and widely praised, Young said it had no heart. It was just notes played perfectly without any soul or genuine emotion behind them. He believed rock music should feel dangerous and unpredictable, but Hotel California felt safe and corporate, as if it were designed primarily to sell records rather than to express something true or meaningful. Young saw the album as representing the death of the California dream he once believed in. He viewed the Eagles as careerists rather than true artists struggling to express something important. They were professionals creating a product, and that disgusted him. He had spent his entire career avoiding that exact path. To him, Hotel California was rock music with all the actual rock removed. It was clean, commercial, and calculated, representing everything he had run away from throughout his life. Boston's self-titled debut album sold 17 million copies and became one of the most successful rock albums ever released, but Young hated every polished second of it. The album came out in 1976 and sounded impossibly clean. Tom Scholz had recorded most of it in his basement using self-built equipment, but instead of sounding raw and authentic, it sounded sterile and manufactured to Young's ears. He couldn't connect to music that felt manufactured even when it was made by just one person rather than a large team. The song More Than a Feeling was everywhere on the radio. The production was crystal clear with every guitar tone perfect and every vocal harmony locked precisely into place. Young said it sounded like robots pretending to have emotions. He believed rock music needed imperfection to feel alive and human. Boston had removed every flaw, and with those flaws went every bit of humanity. The songs might have been catchy, but they were empty underneath. Young believed that being catchy meant nothing if there was no truth underneath the surface. What Young hated most about Boston was how the band made rock music predictable. Every song followed the same basic formula: quiet verse, big chorus, guitar solo, and repeat. There was no danger, no surprise, no moment where listeners might feel the artist was about to fall apart or lose control. Young lived for those unpredictable moments in music. Boston eliminated them completely. To him, it was rock music made for people who were actually afraid of real rock music. Journey's Escape made the band superstars in 1981. Don't Stop Believin' became an anthem, and Open Arms was played constantly on the radio. But Young thought the entire album was garbage. He saw Journey abandoning their progressive rock roots in favor of purely radio-friendly pop music. That shift felt calculated and completely soulless. Young believed they had sold their identity just to get hits, which was unforgivable in his worldview. Steve Perry had an incredible voice, and Young never denied that talent. However, he thought Perry was using that voice to sing about, essentially, nothing. The lyrics were generic love songs without real specificity, anthems without genuine conviction behind them. Young wrote about real people experiencing real pain. Journey wrote in broad strokes, designed to appeal to everyone. Young believed that trying to appeal to everyone meant you actually connected with no one on a deeper level. The production on Escape was massive and extremely glossy. Synthesizers were everywhere, and drum sounds were gated and heavily processed. While Young was moving toward grittier, rawer sounds in his own work, Journey was polishing everything until it shined like a commercial product. Young mentioned that Escape sounded like music made by a corporation rather than by a real band. Every decision felt market-tested. Young always trusted his gut instincts, while Journey seemed to trust their producer and sales projections above all else. Foreigner's fourth album arrived in 1981 with massive hits including Waiting for a Girl Like You, Jukebox Hero, and Urgent. The album was slick, professional, and hugely successful commercially. Neil Young found it completely unbearable. He thought Foreigner represented corporate rock at its absolute worst. This was music made by following a formula, with no real emotion involved. Songs were constructed to sell products rather than to express anything genuine or meaningful. Young called it background music for people who didn't really listen to music. The production was absolutely pristine. Every instrument was perfectly balanced in the mix, and every vocal line was...
Young said the album sounded like music made by people who had stopped caring about music itself and started caring only about making money. The ballads especially annoyed him because they were calculated to seem romantic without actually being vulnerable or honest. Keep On Lovin' You had a big chorus and slick production, but Young heard no real emotion in it. It was just a formula being executed well. He believed that Heartbreak should sound messy and raw. REO Speedwagon made Heartbreak sound like a commercial, pretty but completely empty inside. Young was recording his album Trans around this same time period. It was weird, uncommercial, and confused many of his longtime fans, but it was genuinely honest. He was exploring new sounds because he personally wanted to, not because market research suggested he should. REO Speedwagon did the exact opposite. They found a formula that worked commercially and just repeated it over and over. Young saw that approach as artistic death. High Infidelity sold millions of copies, but to Young, it was essentially worthless as art. Styx released Paradise Theater in 1981, and it became another huge commercial hit. The album was a concept record about the decline of a Chicago theater. Dennis DeYoung sang with theatrical flair, and Tommy Shaw added rock and edge. But Neil Young thought the whole project was pretentious nonsense. He said it was trying to be deep and meaningful without actually saying anything substantial. It was art rock made by people who didn't truly understand art. The album was full of synthesizers and layered vocals. Songs like The Best of Times were designed to be inspirational, but Young found them completely hollow. He believed that real inspiration had to come from truth, not from recycled cliches. Young also hated the theatrical nature of Styx's music in general. They were performers playing characters on stage. Young was always himself when performing, flawed, honest, and sometimes difficult. Styx put on a show and created a performance. Young believed rock should be raw and real. Paradise Theater felt like a Broadway musical pretending to be rock music. To Young, that was even worse than simply being bad. It was fundamentally fake. Asia was a supergroup that formed in 1982. featuring members from Yes, King Crimson, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. These were progressive rock legends who came together to make radio-friendly pop music. Their debut album was commercially massive. Heat of the Moment was played everywhere on the radio, but Young thought it was a complete waste of extraordinary talent. He said they had abandoned everything interesting about themselves just to chase commercial hits. That betrayal bothered him very deeply. Young respected progressive rock when it was genuinely experimental and pushing boundaries, but Asia took all that accumulated talent and experience and made the safest music possible. The songs were catchy but fundamentally boring. The production was glassy but lifeless. Young couldn't understand why musicians with that much ability and potential would choose to play it so incredibly safe. Young believed that Asia proved that talent without courage ultimately means nothing. The worst part for Young was knowing what these musicians were truly capable of creating. He had heard their earlier work with their previous bands. He knew they could create complex, challenging music that pushed listeners and expanded the boundaries of rock. Instead, they made Heat of the Moment, a song with a memorable hook, but absolutely nothing meaningful to say. Young would rather fail while trying something bold and experimental than succeed at making something safe and empty. Asia chose the opposite path, and that disappointed him greatly. Def Leppard's Pyromania sold 10 million copies in 1983. Photograph and Rock of Ages were massive hits that dominated radio and MTV. But Young thought the album represented everything wrong with 80s rock music. It was produced by Mutt Lange with layer upon layer of guitars, vocals, and drums all stacked on top of each other. Young said it sounded like a machine had made it rather than human beings. There was no human warmth, no spontaneity, just a perfect, shiny product. Def Leppard spent months in the studio perfecting every single sound. Young usually finished his albums in just days or weeks. He believed that the longer you spend polishing something, the more soul and authenticity you lost in the process. Pyromania was polished until there was nothing real left. The guitars were huge but generic. The drums were massive but sounded programmed. Young wanted music that breathed naturally. Pyromania suffocated under his own weight of production. Young also hated what Pyromania represented commercially. It was designed specifically for MTV. Every song had a hook designed to grab attention. Every moment was calculated for maximum commercial impact. There was no room for mistakes or weird detours that might surprise listeners. Young believed those imperfections and surprises were essential to making music feel alive. Finally, Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet was the biggest rock album of 1986. Living on a Prayer, You Give Love a Bad Name, and Wanted Dead or Alive made Bon Jovi into overnight superstars. But Neil Young absolutely despised it. He thought it was the final nail in rock music's coffin. This was music made entirely for teenage girls and MTV, with zero substance and zero authenticity. It was just hairspray, power chords, and lyrics about nothing meaningful. Young had watched rock music change throughout the 80s. It got shinier, safer, and more commercial with each passing year. Bon Jovi represented the peak of that disappointing trend. They weren't a real band in Young's view. They were a brand. Every song sounded focus grouped. Every image felt test marketed. Young said they represented the complete corporate takeover of rock music. It had become a product rather than a genuine expression of human emotion and experience. What really killed Young was the massive success of Slippery When Wet. It proved that you could make millions of dollars by selling fake rebellion to kids. Bon Jovi sang about being outlaws and rebels while being completely safe and acceptable to mainstream culture. Young actually was difficult and uncompromising throughout his career. He paid the price commercially for his integrity. Bon Jovi pretended to be rebellious and got massively rewarded for that pretense. To Young, that represented the death of everything rock music should truly be about. Throughout his career, Neil Young never compromised his artistic vision. He made the music he believed in, even when it cost him fans and sales. These albums he criticized represented everything he refused to become: polished, safe, and corporate. Their massive commercial success showed just how rare Young's kind of integrity was in the music industry. He remained true to his belief that music should be raw, honest, and made from the heart rather than calculated for commercial success.